Your Honor, at this time, the defense calls Officer Corey Bryant to the witness stand. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon, officer.
Afternoon, sir.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Good afternoon. My name is Corey Bryant.
And what is your official position?
Police officer, sir.
And how long have you been with the police force?
Since '97, almost 20 years now.
Where do you work?
Roma Police Department, sir.
And do you patrol any specific area of Roma?
Yes, sir.
And what area would that be?
Between Brookhurst and Dolphin, east of the 55.
Now, officer, I'd like to ask you about a specific date in 2003, May 1st. Do you recall that day?
Yes, sir, I do.
What were you doing the night of May 1st?
I was patrolling my usual area.
And were any crimes reported the night of May 1st?
Yes, sir. Dispatch called me out to report to Roma Beach at 11:30.
Objection. Non-responsive. Question called for a yes or no answer.
They're just laying this foundation here. I appreciate the objection and overruled.
Yes or
You
no.
can proceed.
Officer, did you have a chance to finish answering that question?
Not exactly, sir. I reported to Roma Beach at around 11:38 p.m. after I got a call from dispatch saying there had been some sort of crime.
What did you see when you arrived?
I found a woman on the beach who I later identified as Karen Turner.
Was this woman face up?
No, sir. Excuse me, yes, sir, she was. She was face up.
And how far would you say the woman was from any nearby buildings?
About 75 feet.
Oh, officer. At that point, was there anyone besides the woman on the beach?
Yes, sir.
Who would that be?
A young man who later told me his name was Emery Winkle.
Oh, did you have a chance to talk to Mr. Winkle at that point?
I did.
Did you notice anything about Mr. Winkle's condition at that point?
Objection. Vague.
Overruled.
Yes, sir, I did. Mr. Winkle was in shock.
Could you explain exactly how you came to that conclusion?
Yes, sir. As officers, we take a look at a couple of factors to determine whether or not a witness is in shock. We take a look at breathing. We try to measure to see whether or not they're breathing properly. He had shallow breathing. We test to see if they're confused. Can they form coherent sentences? He couldn't. I looked to see if he was stressed out. He was obviously stressed out, very fidgety, very nervous. Finally, I looked at his eyes.
Could you demonstrate to the jury exactly how that procedure works?
Yes, sir. Would you like me to demonstrate it as I had that night?
Permission for this witness to stand and demonstrate.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
That's fine.
What we do as officers to take a look at a suspect's eyes or an eyewitness's eyes is we take a flashlight, first shine it in the person's right eye, check it out, shine it in the left eye, check that out. If a person's pupils are dilated, meaning bigger than normal, it can indicate that they're under some sort of stress.
So, officer, based on your analysis, did you determine whether or not Mr. Winkle was in shock that night?
Yes, sir, he was.
Officer, you may resume your seat. Officer, I'd like to now talk about a man named Detective Parker Jones. Are you familiar with him?
Yes, sir.
How so?
He works for the Roma Police Department.
Do you have an opinion as to his character as a detective with the Roma Police Department?
Yes, sir, I do.
And what would that be?
Known him since '98. Honest and by the book.
Is there a specific incident you could use to relate to the jury to illustrate that point?
Yes, sir.
What would that be?
Back in '08, my partner and I stopped a young man for running a red light. As I approached, the man became nervous. Partner checked his trunk, found 10 kilos of heroin. Detective Parker Jones showed up to the scene a little while later.
And Detective Parker...
Objection. Withdrawn at this point, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Did Detective Parker Jones do anything when he arrived?
Yes, sir. He told us that we couldn't use the heroin because nervousness isn't probable cause to search the trunk.
Objection. Improper character evidence.
Of the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Parker?
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 404, the defense is allowed to proactively offer good character evidence of the defendant.
Your Honor, the people concede that good character evidence is allowed. Earlier, this officer testified that the defendant has been in good standing and such. But this specific testimony that the defendant said nervousness is not probable cause is improper character evidence because it tends to prove that it tends to prove that since the defendant acted properly in 2008, he would have acted properly in 2003.
So how is that not the type of evidence covered by 404 that the defense may put on the good character of their client?
Well, Your Honor, rather than good character, this is propensity.
I think those words are synonymous here under 404. The objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Officer, did you have a chance to finish explaining exactly what Detective Jones did?
Yes, sir. He told us that we couldn't use the heroin.
Did you respond in any way?
I didn't, my partner did.
What did your partner say?
My partner smiled and said, well, what if the driver gave consent?
And what was Detective Jones' response?
Well, he snapped, immediately said, but he didn't. End of story.
Thank you, officer. Your Honor, no further questions at this time.
Ms. Snell, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Before Ms. Snell begins her cross-examination, I'll remind our judges, I know improvisation is one of your categories. This witness was provided to these attorneys just before trial. They didn't even have her witness statement until just before trial to take that into account in your evaluation of each of our fine advocates. You may proceed, Ms. Snell.
Good afternoon, Officer Bryant.
Afternoon, ma'am.
I'd like to begin by talking about May 1st, 2003. Now, that night, you found that Mr. Winkle was in shock, right?
Yes, ma'am.
His pupils were dilated.
That's right.
He was confused.
That's correct.
But you tried to ask him a couple questions, right?
Yes.
Now, before Mr. Winkle could answer any of those questions, the defendant came up and said, "Leave him alone," didn't he?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, let's continue to talk about May 1st. And after that point, the defendant was the only one to investigate Mr. Winkle. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Well, at that point, he took over the investigation of Karen Turner's murder, right?
As far as I know, I don't know if he had any sort of backup, if he had a co-partner, anything like that. I'm not sure.
All right. Now, I want to talk some more about that time in 2008. Now, at that point, the defendant said nervousness alone was not probable cause for searching someone's belongings, right?
That's right.
Let's take a step back to May 1st. That day, you told the defendant that you'd seen Mr. Reese on the beach at 6 p.m., right?
Yes, ma'am. A little before sunset.
The stabbing occurred at 11:30 p.m., right?
That's correct.
But as soon as you told the defendant you'd seen Mr. Reese, the defendant said to search Mr. Reese's tent, didn't he?
That's not exactly correct.
At that point, he told you that you needed to search Mr. Reese's tent at about 1:30 a.m., right?
Oh, 1:30. That's right.
All right, and I'd like to finish up with some questions about the defendant's relationship with Matthew Reese. Now, in your experience, Matthew Reese was never dangerous, was he?
No, ma'am. Mouthed off. Wasn't very fond of us cops. Not dangerous.
But every time you had an investigation and there was no perpetrator to be found, the defendant looked to Matthew Reese, didn't he?
Objection, Your Honor. This is a violation of 404A1 of propensity.
Response?
Your Honor, this is not being offered for propensity. It's being offered for the defendant's motive. Now, as I stated in opening, the evidence will show that the defendant had already arrested Mr. Reese 3 times before 2003. That would give him motive to coerce Mr. Winkle into testifying against Matthew Reese.
This seems like 404 being motive and bias evidence, but Mr. Parker, I'll give you a chance to respond.
Your Honor, we agree that it could go to 404B2 motive, but if that's the only reason opposing counsel is using it, we'd ask for a limiting instruction to the jury that it not be used for propensity. The Detective Jones had a propensity for looking at Matthew Reese as a suspect.
The objections overruled. The limiting instruction will be given constructively. You may proceed.
Yes, sir.